tool that's available to cities in Washington. It's a multifamily property tax exemption. Fairly thorough presentation. There's a lot of information in here. Some of the information that's in the later slides might answer some questions you have earlier on, but you know, whatever you want to do in terms of informality around questions. The reason that we're bringing this before you is, from the administration's perspective, it's our role to bring you information about all the tools that you have at your disposal. This topic actually was discussed at a couple of our strategic sessions, strategy sessions that the council's had over the years, the notion of how do we promote economic development, and would property tax incentive tool perhaps promote mixed-use development in our downtown or in other areas. So we're bringing this forward to see if the council wants us to spend more time on this topic. We don't have a specific proposal, but we wanted to go through it with you. And it's been now several months, I believe, and it was last year's Finance Committee, but we chatted with the Finance Committee about this just in general concept last year to get an initial read, and the initial read from the committee was that we should bring the information to the full council in a workshop. So that's why we're here. So the agenda for this discussion is an overview. I've kind of just been doing that, a little bit more overview information. Then I'll talk about how it works, what the statutory construct is, talk about its applicability to Washougal. Examples is basically a list of all the communities in the state that do it, what the next steps might be. Of course, any questions, and I think it'd be great to have some discussion by the council. So RCW 8414 is the construct that allows municipalities to initiate a program like this, and it provides for two types of exemptions. One is an 8-year exemption, which would be for market rate multifamily housing, or there's a 12-year exemption, and that would be for what's considered affordable housing, and there's a lot of rules about what is affordable. And that exemption is for the approved value of qualifying newly constructed or rehabbed residential units. So it doesn't have to be a new project. It could be reusing and repurposing an existing structure. 1995 is when the state provided this tool initially to locals, and it was for market rate only. And in 2007, they revised the statute to include an affordability component.
Meaning what?
Meaning that used to be it was a 10-year program, and there was not a second program with a longer exemption for affordable housing. It was just you could do an exemption. It might be affordable, it might not, but there was no extra incentive for affordability. Now, since 2007, they've added an additional incentive for affordability, and that's the 12-year exemption. And they lowered the 10-year to 8 years. But what's on the books now is 8 years for market rate, 12 years for affordable.
Could we just do the 8-year exemption?
You don't. Yes, you don't have to do both.
Okay.
You could choose one or the other. But these are tools that are both available. Choose both or one or the other.
Okay.
Are those dates set by the state law? Are we able to lower them or
No,
at all?
these are set by state
Okay.
law. So
Okay.
you're either 8 or you're 12.
Okay.
Right. So why did the state do this? This is a little bit of a summary about the legislative intent behind the RCW. So this is what legislators at the time in '95, right in the wake of the GMA, and then in '07 in the update, the notion under the GMA was to encourage increased residential opportunities, specifically within urban centers, to try to stimulate new construction or rehab of vacant and underutilized buildings for multifamily housing in areas that communities would target, to improve housing opportunities, trying to drive population growth into designated urban centers, take pressure off of existing single-family residential neighborhoods, pressure from higher density single-family or apartments going into neighborhoods, trying to get them to concentrate in urban centers. This was designed to be a tool to help to incentivize that. If you're in an urban center, then of course there's notions about different modes of transportation and a couple of items there. And then that last one, of course, in 2007, they wanted to encourage affordable housing. So how it works, what does this mean? There's a tax exemption. So if a tax exemption is granted, then the developer has to complete their construction within 3 years of program approval. So they got to be ready to go. They got to get going on this thing. The land value is taxed as usual. So right now we are receiving, and all of the taxing districts are receiving property tax, say on a vacant piece of land. It may or may not have an underutilized building on it. That revenue stream doesn't go away. That revenue stream stays there. But any new construction associated, and any other new construction associated with a project is taxed as usual. So for example, if it's a mixed-use building and it's offices or retail on the first floor, those improvements would be new construction and they would be taxed. If it was apartments above that, the apartments would receive the exemption. Or if it was condos, they would receive the exemption. So it's a delay, basically, if you think about what this does. The addition of the new property value to our tax base and the other taxing district's tax base is delayed. It's not that they never pay it, it's delayed. So, and the exemption starts after project completion. So they got to be done before they get the exemption. We're required to monitor, and then at the end of the exemption period, the project is added to the tax base as new construction. Those are the very high level, how it works bullets. There are a lot of requirements that attach to this. This isn't a carte blanche thing where anybody can come in and say, I want an exemption. The council says, yeah, you can have an exemption. There's a lot of requirements. Here's some of the highlights of those. First and foremost, because of the goal of the urban centerpiece, it must be within a city determined, so we call the shots on that, city determined urban center, and it's an area that we have to find lacks sufficient housing opportunities, and then what the mechanism for that is we designate it as a residential target area. That's a specific animal that the statute contemplates. Has to be, it can't be a really small project. You have to have at least 4 new units. If you have a situation, and this could be in some other communities where maybe you have a building that's really been vacant for a while and you're really trying to incentivize a smaller building getting occupied, they could rehab that and benefit from an exemption if you wanted to do that. We have to enter into an agreement with them, so there's a contract. It's much like a developer's agreement. So it's not just, oh, you get this exemption and off you go. We enter into a contract with the developer, and the developer must comply with all the additional, any additional conditions that would be contained in that agreement. And the presentation gets into a lot of detail in a little bit about what that all might be. It has to meet all of our adopted guidelines and standards that are generally applicable, but also would be applicable to properties receiving exemption.
You mean like building standards?
More than that, I mean, of course, they got to meet building codes, they got to meet zoning codes, but
Science standards.
and anything that would normally apply, they have to meet. So, like anybody else, you don't get exempted from requirements. It's a tax exemption. However, and I'll get into this later, you can add requirements to this that would not apply to anybody else, but they would apply to someone getting an exemption. Because you're giving them an exemption. It's a big incentive. You want to make sure that what's going to happen is what we want, and so you get a lot more individual control.
Paul brought up the blank wall issue. Is there something we could do with that?
Yeah, and I've got some information about that.
Okay.
And one of the others along that lines is, could we require that the project include mixed use?
Absolutely. I've got a slide that comes up that gives all the
Thanks.
bandwidth about things we could do.
On the previous slide on the bullet 4 where it says exemption does not reduce property tax, I don't understand that, I guess.
So today we're collecting, say there's a piece of property out there today we collect $10 from that property.
Okay,
After you grant the exception, you'll continue to collect $10 from that property. Property tax revenue will not be reduced from the current revenue. They continue to pay their property tax on the value of the land.
Okay, so it's basically.
It's a delay.
The land continues to get taxed.
Absolutely.
But the building is not taxed.
If they knocked over an existing building, and then there would just be bare land, that would probably reduce it.
It would reduce it.
Yeah.
Yes, if there was if there was a building on the tax rolls, potentially, now, I didn't explore that specifically, but that's probably, if there's an older building, we're getting a little bit from that, we might lose that for a little while. If the building is mixed use, anything that's non-residential would be taxed as new, you'd get new revenue from that. So if it was, let's say, a 3-story building, 2 levels of condos or apartments with offices and retail on the first floor, all of the office and retail would be taxed right away as new construction. But the residential would get an exemption for 8 years, or 12 if it's affordable.
Excuse me, does this apply, if we pass something, would this apply also to the Killian property at the fort?
You decide where you want it to apply. You have absolute control about where you would target. It's called, let's see, where was it? Here. In that first bullet here on this slide, the development must be within a city-determined urban center in an area, and then it says what it has to lack, and that you have to designate it as a residential target area. And I have some suggestions about where it might be applicable later on in the presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So moving on with these program requirements, can't be small. There's got to be at least 4 units, unless you're trying to rehab an old vacant one. They have to enter into a contract with us. They have to meet all of our standards and guidelines, plus any that you would impose. 50% of the space has to be for residential occupancy. So the goal of this is to promote residential construction. Now, you can constrain it to be mixed use, but for example, if it was a 3-story building, it couldn't be 2 levels of non-residential and 1 level of residential, because that would only be a third residential, and it has to be half. So this is state law. All of this is state law.
Could we, I ran into Paul Lewis, who was speaking before a few times, at Fred Meyer. There's not one here, so it had to be in Vancouver. He was saying there are some things in this program that a lot of agencies don't think about that we could require, like amenities.
That's right.
Street improvements and sidewalks and, nice streetlights and things like that. There are things like that we could do in implementing this program.
Right. I think I have some information about that, and then just sort of some philosophical things to consider, or really not philosophical, but policy questions to consider. It's really right toward the end of the presentation about the balance between having an incentive that works and these things that you ask for. And if you ask for too much, maybe no one does it.
Right.
But I have some good discussion about that coming up. I will say here that hotels and motels that offer accommodations on a daily or weekly basis aren't part of this package. This is not for transient housing. This is for, more stable type housing. If they're going to seek an exemption for a rehabilitation project, it can't just be because they want to do the rehab. There has to be something going on there and it's not meeting our building codes. So it's a building we already know has a problem. Some other requirements, you cannot displace any existing residential tenants from the proposed development.
Even temporarily?
I don't know the answer to that, if it's a rehab project. So for example, there's an existing apartment, old apartment, say, or an old house that's not owner occupied. You're going to tear down the house to build one of these projects. You cannot displace that tenant. Well, obviously that's impossible because the new project has to demolish the other one, so potentially you have to have it temporarily. If it's a rehab, I'm not sure, but I'll follow up and find out. It would be completely impractical in that case to apply it then. The 8-year exemption is available for multifamily improvements made at market rates. We already mentioned that. And here's a little bit of the definition around the 12-year. If this is something the council wanted to do in general, and if the council wanted to target somewhere for affordability, the definition is 20% or more of the multifamily units are affordable for low and moderate income households, and that's a function of percentages of the average income in our community. Again, you got to finish it within 3 years, and you got to comply with all the standards. So, what's an urban center? There are some constraints. You decide what the urban center is, but you can't just pick anywhere to be the urban center. It's a compact, identifiable district where urban residents may obtain a variety of products and services, and here's a listing of things that have to be in place. So there has to be either some things that used to be there or that are there that are businesses, such as shops or offices, banks, restaurants, government agencies. So it has to be somewhat of a going operation already, the district that you would identify. It's got to be something there. It has to have some infrastructure in place. And you can see the list, there's all the types of infrastructure that we provide. And then there has to be some other stuff going on there as well. Maybe it can't just be commercial and office. Maybe there's some recreation, or maybe there's some cultural activity. So it's an urban center. So how would it work then to do it here? You would determine that there's an urban center. You would make a finding that it lacks sufficient available, desirable, and convenient residential housing, potentially including affordable housing. You would find that providing additional housing, potentially including affordable housing, in this area would assist in achieving some of those purposes that I stated at the very beginning, those goals of the statute. So you'd have to make those two findings. And then, very specific mechanics here, you adopt a resolution of intention for any area that you're going to target. So if you target multiple areas, there's multiple resolutions. And then you have to have a hearing, and you have to, it's almost like our budget, you have to publish notice of that hearing once a week for 2 consecutive weeks. So it gets kind of extra notice, if you would. And then you have a hearing, and then you would take action to either do it or not do it.
Would this be a good fit with that 99-unit project?
Potentially. It's not, it depends on what the council would want in terms of what would be required to qualify for the incentive. That is not a mixed-use building, for example. If you wanted it to be mixed-use, that building would not qualify. You might, want it to be mixed-use.
Does it have to be mixed use? or-
Nope, that's up to the council. You don't have to, other than what's in the statute, it has to have 4 units, it has to be 50% residential, they have to start within 3 years.
Urban center.
It has to be in an urban center, nothing else.
The reason I bring it up is we've got this project which is temporarily on hold because of some disputes between taxing districts. I'm wondering if this might provide enough of an incentive to move forward in that environment.
The applicant's moving forward with that project. I don't see a timing scenario where we could possibly go through the policy development process with this and make this available to him.
Okay, as
I
long
don't
as he's moving forward,
Right.
no problem.
I don't see this as being something that would be leveraged there.
This is a tax exemption for the city portion of property taxes or for all property taxes?
All property taxes,
All
so,
property taxes.
right, so 1, 2, 3, 4.
So this, 57% of your property tax dollar goes to public education. So this hits the school district pretty hard if this is residential project.
Well, they would be delayed in the new revenue. That's correct. They don't lose anything, but they would
Well,
be
but they-
delayed in the new
They
revenue.
never recapture that 8 years.
When you do a net present value calculation, they do.
Right?
How is that?
How
Does
does
that
that?
work? Well, I've got that in here a little
Okay.
bit later. It depends on the project. Depends on what's in the project.
I don't see how, if even with an infinite stream of revenue, if you take the first 8 years out, there's no way that the net present value isn't changed.
Except that we're only talking about taxing, or giving a tax exemption to activity that would not have occurred without this exemption. And so the school district would get, if we didn't, there's a question of whether the exemption is actually needed, which is my big concern. And some project, and I was talking about that before the meeting, maybe the project would have happened anyway.
Right.
Right.
And it is kind of some speculation, but I've been through these in my other public job, and there is a way to look at pro formas and things like that. And I think they find a way for the consultant to look at it, and the consultant arrives at the conclusion that this project would not have happened without this tax exemption. And-
That's really the purpose of this. It's an incentive to try to get something that you want to happen in your community that wouldn't otherwise happen.
Michelle?
Any idea what the property taxes, for example, on a 99 unit, would be that the city would lose? Any ballpark figure? Or could we come up with that? I mean, I would,
Value of that project, about,
Which project? Bob's
for 90,
project?
yeah, Bob's,
Was it 16 million or something like that?
We just received, either today or late last week, as building plans, and I don't know if the building official has made a final valuation determination yet. But it really depends.
about 200,000 a year.
okay.
Potential, I wouldn't expect more than one. I would expect multiple workshops on this topic. This is an introduction to see if there's even any interest in spending any time on it, because this is a heavy lift. This is
Sure
not a,
There's a lot of reporting requirements too.
if you do affordability.
Yeah.
If you don't do the affordability, then it's not as cumbersome to us. But if you do the affordability, then you've got to monitor all of that, make sure they do that right. But the purpose of this workshop, and there's still quite a bit of information, is to gather from the council whether you want your team to spend any more time on it. If you do, then I would envision another 1 or 2 workshops, because there's a lot to consider. So this is more of a, should we spend any time on it type of a thing. But stakeholders, not just developers, but other taxing entities, are folks that if you're interested in us pursuing this, we need to talk to them, and we need to figure out what all of those things are, and you probably would want to hear from them. Because it's going to be the schools and us, it's the county, then the state a little bit too. I don't know if the
And the
governor will
port.
come down, but,
And the port.
and the port, that's right.
My initial reaction is to not move forward with something like this, just because, we're coming out of a recession. We have development happening already, and we don't really need, I just don't feel like we need to incentivize multi-family units and, control where they're gonna be placed and which downtown area and, how many plants to plant out front and all of these other things. It just seems like we're becoming a bit of a micromanager. I mean, we already have our zoning in place, and we have our, building codes and design standards that were set essentially when we built our downtown plaza area. And I just, we don't have a lot of area to do this. I mean, we just don't have a lot of downtown spaces where some things like this could happen. So why do we need to incentivize people to
I think
come and build on them?
I think a few slides from now, I'll show you some areas where there's some possibility. I think we have hundreds of acres of vacant land where these types of incentives could be
Would
effective.
that be what's the term they used? Central core or central?
Right. I think it's coming up in just a couple more slides.
Okay.
I've got maps to show you.
Right. Does West Hickey have any interest in this?
We've chatted with Wes on and off over the years about different incentives. On this one particularly, he has expressed some interest, but he's not come to us, well, you need to do a multifamily property tax exemption, or I'm not gonna do a project, or I'll do another project. But
So
my,
he's aware of it.
he's aware of the general concept of it. Oh, I'm sure lots of people are aware of this general concept, because it's a tool that's been around for almost 31 years in this state.
Okay, thanks.
When-
So,
I'm just gonna say, when this first came up, I actually had a meeting with Wes shortly after and mentioned this, and he said, any residential project in the downtown core should stand on its own, that if it needs this, it doesn't make sense. That the market will support what we want. We don't need to over-incentivize.
This goes back to your point.
Right, exactly.
Thank you, Paul.
So, I think in 2 slides, I've got the maps. Some of the things in terms of applicability to Washougal, your strategic plan talks about redeveloping our downtown area into a vibrant, accessible economic center. It's consistent with the notion of an urban center. There's a strategy that says that, you know, we want to market the community as a desirable place to live, so we're looking at housing choices, different sorts of housing. Our comp plan is looking for a variety of residential density and housing types, and there's a goal of having a variety of housing types. So as you try to accomplish these goals, this is one tool that potentially could have some viability in doing that. In our downtown plan, there's a number of purpose statements. One of the purpose statements, and this really is kind of the overarching purpose statement, I think it's really important to remember. And then when you look at the maps here in a minute, our stated purpose in our downtown plan is to produce a concentration and a mixture of commercial, office, retail, residential, and civic uses within the town center. So the notion is an urban center, that we're gonna go urban in our downtown. This is a little heads up to what the map's gonna show, areas where you might think about this. One is obviously in the downtown. The other is the Parker's Landing area and sort of the waterfront commercial area. Residential is one of the targets in that development agreement. And then we have an area where we've made investment along East Street. City and the state have made significant investment along that corridor. So it's a good idea to at least consider what incentives or tools you might want to think about along that corridor. So here's an overview of the town center. It's fairly extensive. You have to the west, the West Village. It extends from River over to almost 6th, I believe.
Sixth.
Yeah. North to E and
Actually, I think
or the-
north to the river.
the tracks, excuse me, and south to the state route, except for the public holdings there that you see, our stations. Then you have the core area, which centers around our facility here, the Pendleton Woolen Mill, Main Street, the area where we've seen some redevelopment already, and it staggers to the east, and it goes further depending upon where you're at, but it gets as far as past 27th on the north of Main, and obviously not quite as far as you go south. And then you have the East Village, and in the East Village, you have, this is all subject to those same goals of it being an urban center. That's where you have a lot of vacant land. You can see Angelo's property in the town center core there, and then you can see everything else that's in the East Village, west of 27th. That's all Pendleton's, and that's all vacant. And then you have the dog park there, which is Wes's now,
And by Mark.
and Bimart, right?
Who owns
And
the
exterior
low,
wood.
That's Exterior Woods facility.
that's exterior wood, they own all of that.
That's right. Another area where you could possibly think about this as an incentive is what I've called here, for the purposes of our conversation, waterfront commercial. The red area here is essentially exactly where our highway commercial is. So we have highway commercial all around where the development agreement is for the port, McKillian's, south of the state route, that's all Port Holdings or Killian Holdings. To the north, we have a number of different uses. There's some commercial there already, obviously. It's easy to think about in the town center, this meets the definition of an urban center that I shared with you. There's already things going on there. There's a mix of offices and shops, and there's a civic center. So it meets the definition of an urban center. You could designate all or a portion of this as a residential target. This area in the waterfront, it has a mix of uses already. There are restaurants, there are offices, there's a civic use in the port, there's a recreation use in the port and the waterfront, so it meets the definition of an urban center.
Talk to Killians about this?
The Killians are aware of this. They're definitely a proponent of this. Yep.
Have they made any kind of indication that it would be decisive to get their project going?
I don't know that it would be decisive to get their project going, but, we'd have to dig into that more deeply. They're certainly a proponent for this, though.
Do they have a defined plan? Have we heard anything definite from them?
I have not heard anything definite from them.
So they can sit on there a long time, can't they, where they are? Was it 15 years or something like
The
that?
tenure of the development agreement is a motivation for them, but, it's not a 5-year DA. It's longer than that. I think they're waiting for the market conditions to be right. They have to land their tenants. I believe they get financing. I don't know that for sure when they do it. So they've got to have a viable anchor and some tenants to move forward.
We did that agreement about 7.5 or 2.5 years ago, was it?
It's only been a couple of years or so, yeah. It's still pretty young in the agreement, but the agreement was done toward the tail end of the recession. We're still in it, though.
What was the basics of that agreement again?
It was a vesting agreement, so we vested them to the uses. And then we created a certain body of design standards, certain parameters around infrastructure, and then vested them to fees and those standards. So this was which is the typical parameters of a development agreement. There's really no reason to do a development agreement for a developer other than it really was created in order to provide certainty over a period of time for a larger phase project that we aren't going to, we wouldn't be changing our zoning code every couple of years and throw it for a loop. And so they get vested.
Are they paying property taxes on this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, what they own.
Yeah.
What they own. And then there's the,
Holding costs?
yeah, they're holding it. I don't know if they paid cash, but, they may be carrying it. But, yeah, their portion, they pay property
What
taxes.
is it, roughly 2/3 of that piece, though, is port property?
Yeah, most of, this drawing doesn't isolate just the DA area,
Right.
but the portion that's subject to the DA is mostly the port when you capture the stuff to the east. That's right. So this would be the tool available to the port as well. If the port wanted to do some, say, mixed-use residential, the port is always looking for ways to make their projects pencil. They get curb grants to build buildings. They're always looking for something. I think they would certainly would benefit, and I think a port is a great example of an entity that would certainly benefit from an incentive like this. And then this, I don't know if I need to really show this, you're all familiar with East Street, but just to show you, we have a large commercial zoning corridor. This is the east part of East Street, down to the Safeway there. You can see the multifamily zoning to the north in the brown and all the commercial in the red. That's an area where we meet the definition of urban center, but it's more of a corridor, if you would. But there are other examples in the state where corridors have been targeted. And then this is the other part of the corridor as it extends to the west. So those are just 3 areas, if you would. The town center, just to show that slide again, is an area where we are targeting this for urban development. Our waterfront commercial, we've targeted as a redevelopment and an area where we would like to see concentrated urban development. And then there's been a major investment along East Street and some rezoning along East Street. So the notion is that we were trying to front some private investment there on that corridor, commercial development, potentially mixed-use development. So that begs the question of, well, what could we require of folks if we were even going to consider doing this, if we even think it's a necessary thing to do, or even if it is necessary, if we would even want to do it, what are the strings that we could attach to it to ensure it's meeting our goals? Lots of different things you can do. You could require it to be mixed use, or you could let it be standalone buildings, or you could allow both. If you did decide you wanted it to be mixed use, you could require it be vertically mixed within the same building. Or you could allow it to be a mix of uses as part of a master plan, where you have some retail over here, and then across the walk you have some apartments or condos, more of a village type thing. If you did it as a mixed use, you could require that the residential units be only at the ground level, or only above, or anywhere in the building. You can require big projects. Could be more than 4 units. It doesn't have to be just 4 units. You could require that the units be of a certain size, which is a surrogate for rent and market. You could require them to be 2,500 square foot units, per se, if you really wanted to. You could require them to have 3 bedrooms and 3 baths, or 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, or have nothing of that. You can kind of do whatever you want. You could deal with different height things. You could do different parking things. You could require it to have structured parking. You could impose very precise design standards if you wanted to. To answer questions about whether this is a necessary incentive in a specific case, or if it is a wise contract to enter into for a specific case, you could require a third-party financial analysis, which is essentially a net present value benefit over time. For example, the City of Vancouver requires this, and Paul Lewis does this analysis for them. You could require an advisory board to review it and make a recommendation to you. And just as an example, I'm not aware if they do it in other places, but the City of Vancouver requires this, and they use the City Center Redevelopment Authority Board, which is a separate board that's appointed by the council and acts in an advisory
I
capacity.
think one of the things that every one of these projects would require a separate agreement.
Correct.
So the council would have a chance, I think the statute requires that.
Statute requires a contract.
Yeah.
So you would have to enter into a contract, and you do not have to, you don't have to. If you adopt this program, you do not have to grant an exemption. It's completely up to you.
Can we be capricious?
It's a contract, yeah.
If you don't like the,
If we don't like the way they part their hair,
Well, that's going a little too far, but if you don't like their design,
yes, if you don't like the design.
things like that, you don't like, you just basically don't like what they're doing.
Not enough units, wrong corner.
we, suppose we granted one to somebody, and this is substantially similar.
We could say that circumstances of the ground have
Location.
changed, and we can,
You said location.
different location. We only need one of these projects, we don't need any more. We could make any kind of,
What I'm concerned about is, for
Reason.
example, is a whole bunch of planning commission stuff that comes before planning commission or before council, where you have to be essentially even-handed. Otherwise, you create these huge legal liabilities for yourself. You could be facing multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and with a,
as long as it's not racial or something like that, I don't see it.
okay,
I haven't posed the question to the city attorney. I mean, Brent is experienced in this.
It hasn't, the first one I'm aware of, and I think you got a slide coming up that shows the cities that have done
Yes.
this. The first one I'm aware of is the Heritage Condos north of Esther Short Park. That's one of these projects.
Yes,
There's the Uptown Village project.
yep.
Up where Starbucks is, up on Main Street, kind of by, where is that? What would be what's in that, like La Bottega, they're in that area.
Ali Kasab has a building by the
Yeah,
old city
the
hall.
Prestige Plaza, that's actually a low-income one, has a low-income component.
I could show, I have,
But what I was curious about is you have, Camus has one of these, I didn't know Camus did one.
Yep, Camus has this.
Where do they do theirs?
Downtown. And they require vertical mixed use, no residential on the ground floor, has to be up. I think they have some different parameters around the size of the units, how many bedrooms, something, or house, what, I can't remember all the specifics. It's in their code, though. I didn't do that level of a comparative analysis yet, because what I would, when I get to that, I think, though, to further your question a little bit, Counselor, there'd be an ordinance. The ordinance establishes the requirements for the program. It has to be vertical mixed use. You can probably create, you know, in these blocks this, in these blocks this, and in these blocks this. But once you've set those parameters in place, and there's two properties right next door to each other, if they meet those standards, short of conditions have changed around economics or something like that, I don't know. I don't know the answer. There could be some risk. We'd have to get an analysis of that.
Yeah, I think it's a serious question because, for instance, I mean, no city with a brain in their head lets planning commission or city council rule on zoning exemptions, or you'll always have a hearings examiner do that
Right.
because the liabilities are so awful if you do it any other way.
Right. These are not sort of quasi-judicial, these are contracts, so they're very much like a DA. And the standards are a little bit different for that, but even in, and I'm not a contract lawyer.
Right.
Even in contracts, I don't know if the arbitrary and capricious standard is applicable in a contract. That's really the legal question.
Well, there's, yeah, you know, but I've never really seen this being, you know, there's just someone we didn't like. This person is from Florida, and we didn't like him. You know, I think there's always gonna be some principled distinction you can make in they're all different.
Right. Or if, I mean, you think about this, for whatever reason, there's a number of concerned constituents that come to talk to you at a council meeting when the contract's on the agenda for a specific project. It could be almost identical to one that happened three blocks down and 2 blocks up. Everything's the same. It's part of those couple of 100 acres or whatever sitting there. And for whatever reason, you know, they live next door, or they've got a business next door and they don't like the profile of the building, and you get a lot of negative feedback, and based on that, you decided, yeah, we're not gonna contract on this one, but 2 months ago, we did that other one. I don't know, that could be kind of a squirrely sort of a thing, because you've put these in place, so, but it's a question I'll have to answer, you know,
Yeah.
get some
I
information
mean,
for you.
my nightmare scenario basically is that it becomes Mary Jane's House of Glass sub 2, and I'm not talking about a paraphernalia shop anymore, but a glass-fronted building with clowns out in the front advertising vacancies.
Right. I don't know if you could get into signs and First Amendment stuff with the standards, but you might be, because it's a contract, and you can contractually constrain your speech.
Well, we know that guy is gonna do that kind of stuff, so.
Right. And, you know, I can look into whether specific types of retail uses can be constrained. So here's sort of the kind of the things to consider. This assumes that it's something we would be interested in doing. I posed the broader question in the next slide, but if this was something that we were going to consider to do, there's a balance. The threshold number of units to qualify for the program, so if you have to build a huge project to qualify, and the level of public benefit requirements, all the things that we've just been talking about, what package you put together for that could very much influence the level of participation by developers. The lower the number of units you have to do, and the more limited the public benefit requirements that you make, the more accessible this is going to be to developers, the more takers that you'll probably have. But you might yield smaller public benefit in return for this revenue that you're delaying, right, and that you're losing in over 8 years. What do you get for it? You didn't get much. If you make it too high, and it's so demanding to even go into the program, then no one will do it, and then you haven't met the goal. Why bother then? If you make it so hard, why bother? So what's that balance? And that's the policy dilemma if you decide to do this. Here are the communities in the state that have this incentive on the books. You can see it is a very popular tool. If you want your team to look into this more, one of the things that would happen is we would look in detail at each of these communities, do a little comparative analysis about what they do and how they apply it.
At this first glance, all of those are communities that are considerably larger than we are. We're not a very large community, and this is one of the things I was thinking about in this. We don't have, I see this as being practical for a city, a big city, because you have so many urban areas that you can guide the development in. We don't have that. We're very small. And there is not a comparable one on there to us, as I said.
Camas is far and away the smallest one on that list.
Yes.
Des Moines is pretty small.
And it's twice as large, it's twice as big as we are.
Kenmore's small.
Camas is 20 and we're 15 right now.
I thought Camas was closer to 29.
No, Camas is 20, maybe 21. Yeah.
Moses Lake isn't that big either. Mountlake Terrace is probably smaller than we are.
Yeah, Montlake Terrace is not
Moses
as
Lake
small as
is
we are, I don't
Well
believe.
over 20, it's bigger than Camas.
Not sure how big Marysville is. I could grab population numbers, but yeah, there's no
Well,
doubt
I
about
think
it.
one of the reasons that you don't see big cities or smaller cities doing it is they don't have the staff to
Staff,
do
yeah.
the work on it. I don't know that we could go to the broad areas that you put up there as the target areas. I don't know if they all would all qualify or we'd wanna do it, but.
Right.
Any other Michelle?
Well, I was just jumping ahead to where you said, should we adopt a program? For me, I would want it to be specifically targeted to the downtown core or the East Street, like you said. To me, the port is a totally desirable place to put something, and we shouldn't have to incentivize a beautiful spot right on the river. I think if we did do it, there should be stringent architectural and design standards. Like, it should be what we would want our dream city to look like when we go into a nice section of Portland with public use areas incorporated into the structure. You know, we talk about Leavenworth and how you have to, this would be our way around having those hardcore standards or codes. And if we lost it or didn't get it, then, you know, there's a population on the council that's not even interested in the program. So I think it should be overly above and beyond what one would expect as nice and for use. So I don't have a problem losing the number of takers, and I think it should be mixed use and apply exactly to what we're trying to have happen in our downtown core. And it should be targeted to places where we can't get people. We can't seem to get people down there, and we're in blighted areas where we want something nice and we can't get people. But I think it should definitely be more on the stringent side, because we're giving people an 8-year tax break, and to me, that's a lot of money that our
Hundreds of
our
thousands of dollars
city
a year.
can't afford to lose unless it just has phenomenal benefits beyond that.
To kind of second that, Dan's probably the only one who hasn't heard me say over and over and over again that a single-family house costs about $1.25 in services for every dollar of revenue it provides the city. So building more and more and more residences is not the way out of a financial bind. It's digging the hole deeper and wider as you go. It looks attractive because you get sales tax on the materials that went into the construction, so it's a nice first-year hit. But after that, it's a loser. And so the only way this makes any sense to me is if you use it to incentivize those things that are good financially for the city, retail, commercial. We can't really do industrial on this kind of thing, but, you know,
In a mixed use
if
type
it's mixed use and strong mixed use, then maybe it makes sense. But I don't see that we need any incentives to build more houses or or apartments.
Just standalone apartments.
Yeah,
These have to be 4 units or larger.
yeah, and, you know, if there's a piece in the apartment or condo market that we are not covering, it's the upper end, not the lower end. And it's not at all clear to me that these kind of incentives would drive upper end development.
I guess I'm presiding, I don't need to, are you finished, Paul?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm not used to presiding over a meeting, not in a long time. When I moved to Washougal 13 years ago, I was warned that you shouldn't move there, there's no shopping, there's no commercial, you gotta drive to Vancouver to get anything. And, you know, that's still largely true. We gotta do something with our, you know, we're not, development, you know, I don't know whether the Angelo project is gonna go or not. I don't know this is the place to discuss that. But I think we have to just not put ourselves in a straitjacket and at least explore this a little bit more. I was a little concerned that Mr. Hickey is not very enthusiastic about this program. I'd like to explore that a little more. If he's not, then I'm not sure there's a point in proceeding. But I've seen the success, and you know, I would not be interested in the 12-year exemption. I would limit it to 8 years. We don't need low-income housing. But the projects that I've seen it done in Vancouver have been upscale. The Heritage Place is an upscale project. In fact, they put some things in there, this happened before I was in Vancouver, but they put some things in there requiring that the units be constructed to a certain, you know, like granite countertops and things like that. They put that kind of thing in there, so it can be designed that way.
That's in the contract?
Yeah,
for the
it's something
exemption?
like that. It's, you know, I don't know, they didn't put it in exactly that way, but it was, so it can be designed that way. Yes, Jennifer?
Oh, I'll wait till you're done.
Oh, I thought, no, I'm finished
Oh, okay.
for now.
Well, I see where you're coming from, and I'm, you know, incentivizing development, sounds great, and, you know, upper scale, you know, we certainly do need that as well. But that would also mean that the, not the developer per se, but the landlord, owner, would also be charging higher rents and reaping a higher profit. And do we really want more money going into their pocket versus coming back to the taxpayers? Because that's, if the 8 years of not paying taxes on their high rent apartments is not coming back to the city, then we can't use it to do things for the community in the future. That's what I'm saying. It's not gonna come back to the city.
Well,
That's the crux of this policy choice. This is an incentive. The theory is, the analysis is nothing or a low-level development versus something at all or something special. So keep collecting property tax on a piece of vacant land for who knows how long, or
that's the whole supply side.
something will happen, and now, 8 years from now, we're gonna get money we would have never had. That's the analysis, and that's why you would do it. That may not be the case.
Dave, you're an excellent city administrator, but you're not a finance guy particularly.
No, I'm not the budget guy.
And I've heard the whole, how this actually works in practice explained. Paul Lewis does a pretty good job of explaining it, and actually, when I talked to Sean this afternoon, I thought Paul was gonna be here, but I guess we haven't retained him on this yet.
No, we're not investing significantly on this until we get some direction from the council on whether
I
or
would
not.
just, it would be useful, I think, to have that explained, how the financing of this works and what kinds of things that, maybe if you could bring Peggy Sheehan over to do that, explain how, because I think I think they should be at least taken to that step, and also some dialogue with the downtown property owners. I'd like to hear a little bit more clearly from them.
We might be able to get folks who did a project, say in Vancouver, to come and talk about it, the developer, potentially.
Yes, Paul?
Along with what Jennifer said, more than half of our general fund budget is police and fire, which we still have to provide in increased amounts with no revenue to support it. And, you know, some of the rest of this stuff is not, that's part of the general fund budget. This doesn't affect that, but more than half, my last time I looked, it was 54% of the general fund budget is police and fire and EMS. And we have to provide those services, and they're very, very much population dependent. If we add more people, we need more funding to pay for that. This year, not 8 years in the
Paul
future.
takes that into account, doesn't he?
Well, if it's a mixed-use project, yes, in his net present value analysis, it looks at all of the revenues that would accrue to the city's general fund during those 8 years that you would not otherwise have. So there's utility tax, sales tax. But it's that, like you said, that was beyond the scope of this presentation. This is a kick the tires, because if there wasn't an interest at the broadest policy level, we're not interested in this tool, and there was no reason to get that detailed.
Dave?
Thank you. If you're going to invite somebody to explain things, might we also invite people who might be interested? The West Hickeys, the Killians, the Angelos, whoever, who might be interested in taking on a project.
Absolutely.
Yes, Dan?
Have there been any studies here locally that say if you built a special project trying to attract wealthier or higher income young professionals here, that we could actually draw them here? Because I would love to have more people like that coming here. But is it a thing, if we built it, would they come? I don't know.
Wes has worked on that.
Right. I think he might give you some insights on that, because he's attracted some of that here in terms of where they work. And I think he's kicking the tires on a small project to try to give some of them a place to live. But, you know, whether he's needs this or not is another question. I don't know.
A thought just popped into my head. We're gonna have a retreat at some point, aren't we?
Right. We
Could this
talked-
just be something we can put on the retreat agenda and bring,
Mhm.
so we don't have to make a,
Doesn't have to be at workshop, it could be,
Yeah.
we were gonna do that after the community survey results were back, and that's, we'll report those in May 20-something. So probably early June for our session before school's out.
doesn't have to be a big production, just maybe bring in Paul for a little bit
Mhm.
on it.
And invite some of the private sector folks. Answer the questions, there are a lot of questions, have some more info.
Yes, Michelle?
Yeah, I bet Paul probably has some metrics on if you do so much commercial versus number of units, you know, if there's kind of a 0 point in all that versus the loss too, that maybe we can find out a certain number of units would be this much of a loss versus, and I would think that if we did do this, we'd definitely want what you said Vancouver has.
Well, Vancouver, they're all, the ones that are in at this point are all mixed use, have some mixed use component.
Yeah.
With a third party reviewing if it's a, you know, a market win or not for the city and in those terms. And we've had a lot of briefings on how we're kind of have a bit of a housing shortage here too, in both apartments and this seems like a good way to encourage commercial development in an area where it doesn't seem to be happening. But I don't like to give the farm away by any means. I want to make them work really hard for
Yeah.
something that we get, and if no one takes it, fine.
Any other comments? Well, what's the,
Well, I think I heard some consensus, as there's obviously a disparate viewpoints, and that's what I fully expected. But I do feel direction that should bring this back, and maybe not a workshop, but have it be part of our conversation for the annual planning session, which won't be, well, gee, it's already early February, so March, it's 4 months, probably 4 months from now, that's fine. And we'll bring the financial expert in and try to get some private sector involvement for a portion, schedule that for a time certain, they can come in and talk to
we
you
usually
about.
do that planning session for, like in February or January, it's gonna come a lot later. Why don't we just do it for a year and a half? Kind of off subject, but just do it, so we just don't have to do it next year. Because, we're halfway through the year before we have it.
Right.
Oh, I think the reason for doing that is that
Survey.
not just the survey, but it better informs the budget process. When you're doing it in January, not so much.
Okay.
We're waiting on the land use study.
Joyce?
FYI, Kenmore and Montlake Terrace are both at about 21,000 population,
Well, we're reasonably close to that.
so.
And I don't know if they've got any projects yet, they have it on the books. Some of these communities don't have projects.
They're just more urban than we are.
Do you know if Camus anybody has applied for it and used it in any of their, do
I'm
they
not
have
a-
any projects that?
I'm not aware that someone's made a formal application yet to get a certificate of, I forget what it's called, exemption. But I am aware that there was a project that was a catalyst for what they're doing. Our conversation is more of this is something we've talked about, do we want to have this tool? The Killians have expressed some interest. We've talked to Wes about it. I didn't have the same conversation that Councilman Greenlee had, but I didn't have a conversation with Wes where he raised it up the flag and said, boy, oh boy, we gotta do this, It was, he didn't do that either. So we're a little bit different, but yeah, there was a little mixed-use project that I think they're hoping will happen in Camas. But I don't know really any details about it.
Well, it kind of ebbs and flows. I mean, there was some interest in the 90s on it, and then there wasn't. I'm talking about Vancouver. And now they just approved 3
Right, they have a lot of
just
interest.
this year. That's Dave.
I just wanted to tell Dave, thank you for taking the initiative to bring this to us.
Okay, I think I have enough to hopefully have a healthy conversation again in June.
Okay, one of the things please indulge me, I haven't done this before, but one of the things that I didn't do was mention that we're going to be moving our executive session that we scheduled on sale of property to item E under new business here in the workshop.
Right.
So without objection, we'll add that. And then the community survey.
Right. Council, I emailed out several days ago a final draft, hopefully, of the community survey. It incorporated all of the feedback that the council provided last time, and those questions are now in here. And this is ready to go to the consultant to be made camera ready and for him and his team to get going and do the survey. Let's see, I would point your attention to question number 7, which is on page 3. That is the question about the UGA and our land use study. That question was crafted with the help of Berger ABAM and the survey consultant.
I think, excuse me, but I think you should put out there that the UGA is the urban growth area, so that, because people that are reading this might not know what that is.
I agree.
Right.
Good catch, Joyce.
Acronyms.
Shades of council member Freeman.
Yep. And there's plenty of room, it looks like, that we won't
Yes.
like add another line and mess up the page or anything, so that'll be good. And then the other one that, the others that were kind of new, question number 12, I think this was Councilmember Wagner's idea. If you could name that one thing, that would be awesome. It's not said like that here, but what would that be? So that's number 12. And then 12A is would you pay for it? So that's new. Question 13 is an expanded and elaborated question about Initiative 502 and marijuana. And it gets a little bit more specific and up to date about that. And then question 14 is a much more elaborate question based on your feedback with multiple parts about this notion of a vehicle license fee and how much we currently spend and, you know, what they would think about that for different uses.
Okay. Can we talk about roundabouts in here?
It's not in here.
We should. Or is that already a done deal?
Well, no, I mean, we have to do options analysis. So we got indulgence, I will tell you this. You'll notice that this survey is now 4.5 pages long. And they're gonna do that without any extra charge, which typically is a 4-page survey. Partly because it really is only one question. That question 14 is just kind of long. The other ones are just demographics, and so they're not really worried about that. So I don't know if we could do it.
The thing that I'd kind of like to know, and there's a bunch of different ways to ask it, is, one way is, are you retired or semi-retired? That's just one possible choice, and that could be under the annual household income. Another way of asking the question to get the information I'm looking for is, do you have children under the age of 18 in your home?
Wouldn't the census data tell us all of that?
Well,
By
it
tract?
it did as of 2010.
The school district have that?
I think that's available by census tract.
Sure it is.
But only, I mean,
Yeah, it's 5 years old.
yeah.
6 years old.
David, is question 14 asking if you'd rather have that 500,000 diverted somewhere else and use the $20 to maintain? That's a little confusing to me, I guess.
So 14A?
Yeah, at 14, just plain on 14, the city currently spends 500,000 from current revenues to maintain overall pavement condition on city streets. These funds could be used for other program, service, and projects. Is this, are you getting to the point where we use that 500,000 for something else and then use the $20 for the fee? Because I always thought the question was, do you want additional money for road maintenance?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Both of those scenarios have come up
Okay.
and been expressed by different council members. There's
Okay.
never been any consensus on it. There's been some discussion that if there was a TBD, if it was gonna go to maintenance, that some of the funds would offset existing spending and free up money in the general
Okay.
fund. And that's what this is getting at.
Okay.
Yeah, for instance, a tab fee, a $20 tab fee generates, if I remember right, roughly $220,000.
It's probably about 240 or so now, but yeah.
If that came back into the general fund, that would buy 2 new police officers.
Couldn't do it though, could you?
Well, you could, we're spending $500,000. Not all of that's general fund,
Or
but
are you talking about supplanting?
supplanting.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Well, we
Now-
have a rule that we won't supplant though.
That's right. Right now we do.
Yeah, you could change it.
But,
That's right.
but that's the kind of choice that's out there, is if you had that $220,000, you could hire another police officer, actually 2.
Choice.
I think there's a typo. On 14.1, used for pavement maintenance, only answer number 15A.
It should be 14A.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that the consultant does is they test drive this. And so I'll work with them and see about clarifying this, if it was confusing.
I like your idea of getting some input on the roundabouts.
I agree.
I really do.
That's important.
If adding the semi-retired, retired, and roundabouts question would cost us a little more,
Well,
are you
go ahead.
open to
I was
that, or
gonna
would
s-
you cross off
I
either
was
one?
gonna suggest that 14A, I think you could probably figure out what their answer to 14A is by your answer to 14. I don't know if you need 14A.
14A is, it seems
I think it's
redundant.
confusing.
It's redundant, it's,
Yeah, and you could probably figure out what their stand would be on 14A by their answer to 14. So you could bounce that one out and do a roundabout question, although it's not.
I'd be willing to throw out number 13.
And I think the roundabout question has to provide enough specifics that they understand what we're looking at.
Right.
Roundabouts on Highway 14, for example, as
Yeah,
opposed to,
that's-
how do you feel about roundabouts?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that you can't give them enough information that they can give you an intelligent answer.
But we've got that information on the website, right?
We do.
About roundabouts?
About this project?
We have two
Yeah.
concept drawings, is what we have.
People are gonna spend no more than 15 seconds on their answer to these questions.
Just been that long, that's great.
You know, I would be okay with deleting number 13, because, if you're suggesting that, Jennifer.
I was.
Because I know I'm in the minority here, and I don't want to make it any more painful than it has been in the past.
disagree
Unless I'm
with-
surprised at other people's opinions on it. But I would be inclined to just,
Which one is that? Brent?
it's on marijuana.
Page 4, number 13.
I would just be inclined to delete the sign, well, I wouldn't be inclined, but I would just like to get over with minimal amount of hassle and just delete the sunset. And I'll vote no on it and move on.
I think
I-
it's still a question that should be out there and let's get a response to it. I'm not opposed to eliminating the
I'm-
sunset, but I think that it's been around now for a while and people, I don't know, I would be curious what people are thinking at this point in time.
I feel the same way as you do, unless we were going off of, wasn't there something about the voting in the county that our particular section, the statewide vote on it? Was it-
It lost in Washougal by 14 votes,
Oh, it did?
And it lost countywide also.
by more than
Oh,
that, but,
okay.
yeah.
It was very close here.
It was 14 or 28, I can't remember, too.
But yeah, it lost in both Washougal and in Clark County.
Okay. All right, well,
I'm just not looking forward to that debate
yeah,
coming
then,
back.
I don't want it then.
I like the idea of the retired
I
people.
do too. I think
You
that's
know.
important.
Well, how about going a little bit beyond that, saying, what's your occupation? Retired. Whatever, however, you see breakdowns of how people get put in these occupation.
I can ask them, they might have a standard demographic question
No.
that gets at occupation / retired /
Yeah, the
semi-retired.
problem is, if you're a retired engineer, do you say engineer or do you say retired?
I would say retired, but maybe someone else would say,
Brent, what's your reason for wanting that?
It's my interest, really. If there is a substantial retired community, then that means that on a long-term planning basis, you need to think more about the kinds of services and issues that those people want and need. For instance, aging in place, which means community access to shopping, however you do that, among other things. On the other hand, if there's a very small percentage of retired folks, if it's mostly people who have young children in the household, then you're much more interested in thinking about how do we find the funds to build a rec center, a youth rec center, or more baseball, soccer fields, which we're losing. And so I think it's an important issue in terms of how you think about your long-term planning.
And I think it is an important issue, and I think the data are available from other sources. The census is one, and there are others. There are community surveys that are done from the federal level, for example, for tax and facility planning purposes.
I haven't been able to find any. If you can find some, I'd be fascinated.
I've never looked for them, to tell you the truth.
Hmm?
I know they're out there, because I've seen them advertised on
And,
television.
yeah, and the census data is 2010 data.
Is that the latest?
Yeah, that's the last time we did a census.
I can ask the consultant if he has access to a database that could tell us this information. I can also ask him if he has a standard demographic question that can get around that. I think one thing I might expect to hear from him is that age is a surrogate for that. That, because we are asking for age, and you could make an assumption, I know that there are folks that are 65 that work and don't retire till 70,
The
so
thing
it's
that-
not perfect.
The thing that surprises me is the number of people 65 who have elementary school kids in their home.
Grandparents.
Right, second-gen parenting.
Well, the interesting thing about question 13, though, is, in light of what you just said about the votes, is everybody that I experienced coming to our meetings, by and large, seemed to be in support of what we were doing.
The ban.
Yeah, and so that would be of interest to me, I guess, you know, if the one thing's saying this, but everybody that's showing up here is saying a different, because that's what I was going off of in my decision for that.
It's
Um,
50, it's,
Yeah, it's so close, I guess,
I don't, who knows?
yeah,
I mean,
and so, I guess,
nationally, it's, the polling, it's getting more and more people are supporting legalizing.
right.
We asked this question last time,
Oh, you did?
yes.
And what was the result then?
I'd
It
have to-
was a little bit more negative than the 50-50.
Oh, it
but
was?
Yeah.
It was
Oh.
not that much
It's
more.
50-something to 40-something
Oh, okay.
to not allow it. However, there was some concern that the question, I think kind of the same concern that I've heard about the roundabouts. There wasn't enough information to help them meaningfully respond. It just said, Washington voters, it was the first sentence. Washington voters approved Initiative 502 allow for the production blah, 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 of marijuana, and then the last sentence, please indicate your support, yes or no.
Why don't we just ask, should Washougal allow A, B, and C?
I think the question is fine as
Yeah.
it stands.
Well, we don't need to give them a history lesson, they know that pretty much, everybody knows that it's legal in some places in this state, the federal law notwithstanding. But it's, and I don't know that we need to give them talk about Initiative 502.
Part of the problem with that is that if you ask somebody on the street, there's been some polling on this, almost half the people believe it's okay for parents to give their children, especially over 18, marijuana. And it's actually a felony. And so the amount of public misinformation out there, or non-information, is awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
I don't need any guidance from the public on this. I got elected on a platform was anti-drug, and if that doesn't suit the public, they can recall me before the next election.
That's why I'm not sure we need to ask the question.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you two on this. The answer to the question is not going to change my mind. On the other hand, I thought it would be interesting information, but if deleting that gives us the information on,
Another question that's more valuable is what,
then I'm okay with deleting it.
Me too.
And that would be the demographic questions about household, kids in the household, and retired, semi-retired.
Yeah. For me, I mean, there are others that, but that's the one that kind of, I want to start thinking about.
So the feedback that I have is everything's looking good. Make sure we say what UGA is. I think everyone knows what NW and NE means, but UGA, we should clarify. There was a little typo that's helpful. Delete number 13, move 14 to 13 or something like that. Think about getting rid of 14A and/or work with the consultant to clarify that, to make sure, particularly if we need to drop some space, but make sure that's more clear. And then get at the demographics of retired or semi-retired, and if there are kids 18 or less in your household, and if so, how many, something like that. And then it's a survey. And I won't bring that back, because, I mean, I could email it out one more time.
Just one more suggestion, and it's just a suggestion. These questions jump all over the map. I mean, it would kind of make sense to ask like questions, you know, one right after the other, and then, you know, subject matter. Like, we talk about, let's see, City Hall and service and that sort of thing, and, you know, but before that, we ask about UGA and, you know, that sort of thing, and then we go back to land development, and, you know what I'm saying?
Keep 'em in.
It's like we're jumping all over
Right.
the place, but maybe if we could group the questions, you know,
We
into
could do that. What I'd like.
subject matter.
Right, no, I understand what you're saying. Part of that is, we took a question out and we slipped a question in.
Right.
We didn't reorder. But also, even in the previous one that the consultant designed, there was a little bit of that. And what I'd like to do, I kind of tend to agree, and I hadn't really thought about that. I would like to just ask the survey expert, is there a survey expert reason to not categorize that way? That makes it more statistically valid or something. In the absence of anything like that, I think I can ask him to reformat it.
That's all I have.
Anything else from the survey? We've got 5 minutes left. Do we have, is that enough time to do the
Yes, I think it
property
is.
thing?
Yeah, I think it is. This is pretty straightforward, and if it's not, we can.
We need,
Is this the executive session?
No.
Oh, okay.
oh, okay.
We're not gonna do the executive session.
Okay,
on
I
the
just wanna
property.
make
Yeah.
sure. I'm kind of hiding back here, but it's not on purpose.
So this was going to be executive session, and so that's why it's not. You could pass those things for me. One for Jennifer, please.
I'm sorry. I grabbed the first one that came my way. I was asleep at the switch.
Save one for Rose. You'll recall a gentleman who came to council once or twice and was talking about wanting to buy a tract from us. It's in a subdivision. So on the first page, you see a little blue square right in the middle. That's just to orient you to where it is. And then the second page is a zoom in of that. So it's in the Summer Slope North subdivision. And that square there is a tract owned by the city of Washougal. We don't need it.
Why do we have it?
I don't know why it was dedicated to us as part of the tract, but it was dedicated to us.
Neighborhood park or something?
I need to pull the plat. I don't remember why it was given to us, but it is not in our portfolio to do anything with. And this individual wants to purchase the property. I'm pretty sure he wants to keep it as open space. And he came to the council and you basically said, yeah, that sounds great. He came in citizen communication. Trevor reported about what the status was, and I think he had misunderstood some of the things that Trevor had asked him to do, and he had to jump through some hoops. Namely, he had to get approval from certain number of folks in his homeowners association because it's a tract and it would, then has to get a plat alteration made because it's dedicated to the city, so you have to alter the plat. Then what we have to do is, oh, and then get an appraisal. Then what we have to do is process the plat alteration, surplus it, so that'd be an action that you would take, surplus it, and then authorize the mayor to basically sell it. Price is not determined, we're waiting for the appraisal. So this is what we need is some general guidance. It doesn't have to be a formal action, but it's just to keep you posted on what's going on. Is the next step is the mayor, because we own it, the mayor would authorize this individual to proceed with a plat alteration. It's gonna cost him $1,800 to do that. He doesn't wanna do that unless he kinda heard one more time generally, informally, that you guys are okay with it.
What happens if somebody else comes in the door and makes a higher offer?
We could take it.
You could take it, I suppose, or you could not take it, and you could sell it for appraised value to this.
Are there parks up there? Was that originally for a park? I mean,
What's that triangular portion next to it? Is that?
That's utility and storm, I believe. Yeah.
Is it developable as a residence if he changed his mind?
I wish I had Mitch with me. I don't believe so. I don't believe that we're changing the use of it, just the ownership, and that requires a plat alteration,
Does he live in one of the adjoining properties?
I'm pretty sure. Yep.
There's
On
some-
the issue of the plat, the second guy's gonna need the plat too, right? So he could buy it from the first guy.
Once we don't own it, it can transact, right? It could transact in perpetuity between private parties, but I believe it will still be Tract E for the purposes that it has.
Well, they could boundary line adjustment, all the parcels, that we could do that too.
To get backyards,
Mhm.
build accessory buildings. What I can do is on the break, since we're right at the time, what I wanted to do is corroborate that you still wanted to sell the property to him.
Why would we want to keep it?
We have no reason to keep it. That's what the team tells me.
Completely surrounded by residential, isn't it? Yeah, that's fine.
Joyce, it looks like that piece may be a park, this big open, but I can't see, I'm looking at the parks thing.
I know, I can't either.
With my, I didn't bring my glasses.
Or at least open spaces.
There's something on this map that you can see that looks like on the parks plan, maybe a park, that thing right there. I can't tell.
Hartwood Park is up there someplace, isn't it?
Yeah, that's M loop. I can dial up the, but we're at time unless you want to go for a little while.
No, I think,
I can
we'll
do
leave
it
there
at
half an
7.
hour, so,
Yeah, I can pull up the GIS.
Okay.
This piece right here, I
I'm
can't
gonna,
read what it
unless
says.
Dawn has public comment, I'm going to adjourn our workshop and we'll reconvene for our regular meeting at 7.
Good for you.
And I'll answer those questions for you at 7.
Point it out to me. I can't, I'm not getting it on the map.